Imagine stepping into a bustling festival crowd on a warm Indiana afternoon. The aroma of fresh-cut grass and barbecue mingling in the air. A lone mandolin note cuts the chatter like lightning across the summer sky. You follow that sound until you find a makeshift stage, and there, standing tall with a mandolin cradled against his chest, is an older gentleman in a crisp suit and a broad-brimmed cowboy hat. He arches his arm and launches into a breakneck instrumental run that seems to defy human dexterity. The crowd erupts. Some sway to the fiddle, others holler in delight, and a few stand there in awe, trying to catch sight of every frenetic finger movement on the strings. This is bluegrass in full bloom, an infectious blend of velocity, old-time mountain soul, and razor-sharp musicianship. And right there at its epicenter is Bill Monroe, the man history would call the father of bluegrass music. If you've never heard of him, buckle up, because his story is every bit as dramatic, foot-stomping, and triumphant as the music he created. Born William Smith Monroe on September 13, 1911 in Rosine, Kentucky, Bill was the youngest of 8 children in a family that farmed just enough to keep food on the table. The region itself, rolling hills, thick woods, and the faint hum of fiddles drifting from neighboring homesteads, was a cradle of Appalachian folklore. But Bill's childhood was far from idyllic. Born cross-eyed, often called wall-eyed in those days, he endured relentless teasing. A quiet kid by nature, he retreated even deeper into his shell, preferring the company of the family's instruments over playground banter. His mother, a deeply musical woman, encouraged all her children to sing and play. Yet the guitar and fiddle, already claimed by older siblings, were off-limits to Bill. The mandolin, considered something of an afterthought in the family's informal jams, fell into his hands. Fatefully, that leftover instrument would spark a revolution in American music. By the time Bill was 10, tragedy struck. His mother died. 6 years later, his father passed away too. Orphaned before adulthood, Bill was sent to live with his Uncle Pen, who resided just over the hill from Rosine. Though devastating, this turn of events allowed Bill to soak in the old-time fiddle tunes Uncle Pen played every evening on the porch. Bill would sit at Pen's feet, mandolin in hand, matching each fiddle phrase with doubled notes and driving rhythm. When you hear the twang and virtuosic swirl of a fiddle in a modern bluegrass band, you're hearing echoes of those porch sessions. Uncle Pen's influence so shaped Bill's life that he later immortalized him in the song Uncle Pen, a tribute to a mentor who helped plant in Bill's heart the seeds of Appalachian folk tradition. As a teenager in the late 1920s, Bill had no illusions of an easy life. He worked the family farm and occasional odd jobs, but all the while, his mind buzzed with melodies. In the early 1930s, he drifted north to find better opportunities. He and his brothers, Birch and Charlie, started performing as a group, but it was Bill's collaboration with brother Charlie that gathered momentum. They formed the Monroe Brothers Act, yodeling and harmonizing on early country radio stations around the Midwest. By the mid-1930s, they were on the cusp of something bigger. Landing a contract with RCA Victor in 1936, they scored a surprise hit with "What Would You Give in Exchange for Your Soul?" The track might sound simple to modern ears, but at the time, the clarity of their harmony and Bill's distinct mandolin work made people sit up and pay attention. If you were tuning in from a scratchy living room radio, you recognized that these were not run-of-the-mill country crooners. There was a certain drive in the way Bill kept time and underscored every phrase with a hint of rhythmic urgency. Still, family can be as combustible as it is supportive, and tensions between Bill and Charlie rose. Their musical visions began to diverge. Bill wanted more emphasis on speed, skill, and a certain high, lonesome sound, while Charlie leaned toward a more traditional country approach. The Monroe brothers parted ways in 1938. Suddenly, Bill was on his own, itching to craft a new ensemble that captured the fiery spirit he'd been hearing in his head. In 1939, he launched the Bluegrass Boys, named in homage to Kentucky's lush, rolling countryside. Early lineups of the band featured fiddlers, guitarists, upright bass players, instrumentation typical of hillbilly groups of the time. But Bill had new ideas. His big break came that same year when he secured a debut slot at the Grand Ole Opry with his rendition of Mule Skinner Blues. Imagine thousands of radio listeners across America hearing that piercing mandolin run, Bill's trademark high tenor vocals, and a bit of yodeling for good measure. It was electrifying, like someone had just poured jet fuel into the veins of country music. The Opry invited him back, and soon Bill Monroe and his Bluegrass Boys were weekend mainstays. If you think the tale ends there, Guy forms band, finds success, the end, think again. The real big bang of bluegrass was still around the corner. Enter two young musicians who would forever alter American roots music, Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. Bill hired them in 1945 and 1946, respectively, and the synergy was instantaneous. Flatt brought a smooth yet earnest guitar style and lead vocal ability. Scruggs arrived with a three-finger banjo-picking technique so rapid and precise, it left audiences gaping. Adding that to Bill's aggressive mandolin leads and high tenor, the band created an entirely new musical vocabulary. They recorded Blue Moon of Kentucky in 1947, a haunting waltz that built to a near-frantic pace by the end. Fast rhythms, complex instrumental breaks, close vocal harmonies, and that high lonesome wail. These were the defining features of what soon would be called bluegrass music. By the early 1950s, Bill Monroe was, without doubt, a star, yet life on the road was grueling. In these years, Bill signed with Decca Records, where he remained for decades, churning out a steady stream of new material. Kentucky Waltz, Uncle Pen, Rawhide, Footprints in the Snow. Each track further refined the emergent style, featuring triple fiddles, bounding upright bass, piercing banjo, and Bill's mandolin galloping at breakneck speed. Bluegrass was in many ways an accidental fusion of old-time string band music, Appalachian balladry, gospel quartets, and Monroe's restless creative spark. To keep that spark alive, Bill constantly recruited and developed new talent. The Bluegrass Boys became a proving ground for future luminaries, like Mac Wiseman, Jimmy Martin, and Sonny Osborne. Picture a farm team for a Major League Baseball franchise. Only this one minted bluegrass legends instead of sports stars. Through the 1950s and 1960s, Bill's music permeated rural America, but he wasn't yet a cultural icon beyond the South. Rock and roll was overtaking the charts, and some country fans turned their attention to electric guitars and brash beats. Bill Monroe's acoustic revolution might have been sidelined or forgotten by mainstream radio had it not been for his persistent touring and the powerful loyalty of Grand Ole Opry fans. Additionally, in the 1960s, a folk music revival opened fresh ears to the banjo-fueled sound emerging from Bill's band. College kids from the Northeast, drawn to Pete Seeger's folk activism, discovered Monroe's records and started traveling south to festivals, hungry for authenticity and tradition. Sensing an opportunity, Bill took a bold step in 1967. He founded the Bean Blossom Bluegrass Festival in Indiana. This festival was among the first of its kind, bringing together fans and pickers from far and wide for days of music under the stars. There were impromptu jam circles, mandolin workshops, and new friendships forged over shared love of that blazing, unstoppable chug of a good bluegrass band. But success and cultural impact didn't shield Bill from personal hardships. He had married Carolyn Brown in 1935, fathering 2 children, Melissa, born in 1936, and James, born in 1941. The frenetic schedule of touring and recording eroded his marriage, leading to divorce in 1950. Heartache and restlessness seemed to follow Bill, who then entered a long-term relationship with Bessie Lee Malden, the band's bass player, although that too ended in the late 1960s. Meanwhile, Bill's daughter preferred privacy, retreating from the music world's glare, but his son James eventually took up the mantle of bluegrass. They performed together occasionally, a father and son duo bridging the old guard and the new. The personal tension Bill experienced seeped into his music, intensifying the emotional range of his performances. Despite the bumps along the way, Monroe's resilience was legendary. In 1981, doctors diagnosed him with stomach cancer, yet he returned to the Opry stage within weeks of surgery. Frail but determined to pick that mandolin, wearing his trademark embroidered suit. Over the next 15 years, he survived heart surgery, overcame various ailments, and even recovered from a serious hip fracture in 1996 at age 84. The man refused to quit. Fans admired his tenacity as much as his music, often marveling at how he would limp onto the stage only to transform into a whirlwind once the spotlight hit and the band launched into Rawhide or Uncle Pen. Looking back over his career, it's easy to see Bill's discography as massive. He recorded more than 500 tracks, some of them multiple times, each new version revealing subtle changes in phrasing or instrumentation. He'd endlessly tweak arrangements, instruct band members to try new solos, or speed up the tempo mid-performance. There was no final version of a Bill Monroe tune, only a continuous evolution, reflecting his drive to keep the music fresh. The 1970s folk and bluegrass revival catapulted him to new heights. Younger musicians from all corners came knocking at his door, wanting to learn from the master. It was a crowning irony that, as old-fashioned as his music might have seemed in the 1950s, by the 1970s and 1980s, Bill Monroe's style was recognized worldwide as a pillar of American roots music. Then came the accolades. In 1989, he snagged his first Grammy Award for the album Southern Flavor. Critics were quick to note that this wasn't a token trophy for a retiring legend. The record's lively sound proved Monroe was still innovating in his late 70s, still pushing boundaries. 2 years later, in 1991, he was inducted as part of the inaugural class into the International Bluegrass Music Hall of Fame, a well-earned acknowledgement that you couldn't tell the story of bluegrass without mentioning Bill Monroe. In 1993, the Recording Academy granted him a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, placing him among the pantheon of musical pioneers. Even more striking, in 1997, just months after his death, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame posthumously inducted him. Critics at the time noted how Elvis Presley's early cover of Blue Moon of Kentucky had significantly influenced rockabilly, and by extension, rock and roll. Bill Monroe's presence in that hall underscored that his contribution transcended country or folk labels. It molded the entire American music landscape. Sadly, the final year of Bill's life saw his health decline sharply. In April 1996, he suffered a stroke. Despite a lifetime of comebacks, this blow proved insurmountable. On September 9, 1996, just 4 days shy of his 85th birthday, Bill Monroe passed away at a care facility in Springfield, Tennessee. The outpouring of grief from the music community was immediate and immense. Country stars, bluegrass pioneers, and fans from across the globe joined together to mourn. At his memorial at the Opry, Ricky Skaggs, one of Monroe's stylistic heirs, played a solemn tribute. He was buried in his birthplace, Rosine, Kentucky, laid to rest in the same earth that had fostered his earliest musical dreams. Fast forward to 2025, and Bill Monroe's legacy shows no sign of fading. Every year, thousands flock to the Bean Blossom Bluegrass Festival, still held in that idyllic clearing in Indiana. A new generation of pickers, kids who never saw Bill in person, stand on that same stage, plucking Uncle Pen or Blue Moon of Kentucky, dedicating each note to the man who taught them what high lonesome means. In Rosine, the Bill Monroe Museum draws visitors curious to see the old family farm, relics of his early mandolin, and pictures of him perched next to Uncle Pen. Modern-day folk, country, and even rock bands cite him as a foundational influence, pointing out that the speed and drive in their performances were directly birthed from Monroe's approach to rhythm. New documentaries, like Bluegrass Roots, slated for release in 2024, promise to bring his story to audiences who might only have a passing familiarity with banjos and fiddles. The filmmakers aim to show that Bill Monroe's music was a vessel for something bigger, the heart and soul of Appalachian culture, the irrepressible spirit of a man shaped by orphanhood and adversity, and the resilience of an art form that blossomed against the odds. Bluegrass, with its breakneck tempos and soulful harmonies, found a father in Bill Monroe, but it also found a champion, someone who ensured that tradition and innovation could walk hand in hand. As the final notes ring out, you might wonder, could Bill have known the scale of what he'd wrought when he first strummed that leftover mandolin as a kid, hiding away from bullies on a Kentucky farm? Perhaps not. Perhaps all he knew was that playing the mandolin felt like home, that the sound of fiddle tunes carried him back to the mother and father he lost, and that the applause from a radio station's audience gave him a sense of belonging. Whatever his innermost motivations, Bill Monroe's journey taught us this: if your music, or your passion, whatever it may be, burns brightly enough, it can sweep up entire generations in its glow. And that is exactly what Bill Monroe's mandolin did, forging an endless spirited sound that still resonates in every corner of the world where people gather to laugh, cry, and dance to the timeless beauty of bluegrass.